Hello, everybody. My name is Dom of X, and today I would like to give a gigantic shout out again to my buddy Will over at Titan Comics for making this video possible. This is a recorded interview that I had with Charles Ardai earlier in this week, and we talked about the brand new Heat Seeker book that is coming to shops. But not only that, we went over the history of pulp fiction and comics just in general, his favorite genres, inspirations for this specific piece of literature over with Gun Honey and also with Heat Seeker. But not only that, curating the entire line of hard case crime comics over at Titan Comics, along with working alongside and with other superstars in the pulp fiction lore, such as Max Allan Collins, of whom I've read as Batman earlier in the year and also last year, and also talked about twists and the art of writing. So without further ado, please welcome Charles, our guy, to Stop. All right. Hello, everybody. I am Dom of X, Associate Editor of ComicReleases.com, and today I have another special guest that I am going to have a conversation with on my channel. You know him from multiple game magazines, the founder of Juno Online Services, if my mind recalls correctly. I am talking to Inkpot Award winner and co-publisher and creator of the Hard Case imprint at Titan Comics, writing titles such as Gun Honey, with a brand new series Collision Course that started back in May, and of course a brand new Heat Seeker miniseries starting called Expose, which of course is a Gun Honey series and spinoff. Please welcome Charles Ardai to the channel. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, thank you. It's fun to be on here. I spent entirely too long tinkering with video settings, trying to look decent. But you know, you don't go into comics because you are such a great looking person. So you will see that I don't go on the covers of Gun Honey myself. That is not by accident. But I will curse your viewers with this unhandsome mug.
Oh no, it's okay. I mean, you got a Stephen King book in the background. I think
That's true. We have good backgrounds. Exactly. Stephen King, Isaac Asimov. I think there's a Starship Enterprise back there somewhere.
See, like, I'm already jealous because my background is comprised mostly of comic books, and right now I'm trying to catch up on my backlog of Nintendo games, and you're like, I'm going to bring all of the cool novels over here, Mr. Aficionado.
Well, I've got video games on a different shelf. So one day, the next time we do an interview, I'll point the camera toward the video games.
I can't wait for that day too. But of course, thank you so much for coming over here and talking to me about everything that has to deal with pulp fiction, because there's so much I'm still learning, because I am a newcomer to this entire genre, if you may. My background is mostly in superhero stuff because that's what I grew up with. But I kid you not, Charles, my buddy in Malaysia, we were talking about this a little bit backstage, he told me that, hey, the Gun Honey artist is Malaysian. Yes. And I said, oh, are they? I'll support you guys then, because obviously, you know, he's Malaysian, lives in Malaysia. Excellent. And all that. And
yeah, so I started writing the book before we had an artist chosen. I can't draw for beans, as they say. I can't draw, but I can write. So I wrote the book, and it was about a character who grew up in Singapore, and her mother was Malaysian, her father was Corsican, and then she fled to the United States. And I didn't know what artist was going to draw it, and I put out kind of an open casting call on ArtStation, which is a tremendous website where really talented artists, both newcomers and veterans, post their stuff. And of all the submissions that came in, there was one from an artist named Kheng in Malaysia, in Ipoh, Malaysia, whose work was gorgeous. It was like a young Frank Frazetta, you know, traditionally done with pen and ink on paper, not digital, with tons of tiny cross-hatching. It was just gorgeous. And it was an accident that the art for this character, whose personal history was from Malaysia, happened to be drawn by an artist in Malaysia. But of course, that makes it that much more authentic. So I was really delighted. It's not the reason we ended up choosing him, but it was just a happy coincidence. And as I mentioned just before we started recording, we're working now with 2 production companies to try to create a Gun Honey TV series. This may or may not come to fruition. The U.S. company is the company I worked with for 6 years to create the TV series Haven on Sci-Fi, which was based on one of the hard case crime novels written by Stephen King. But we're collaborating with a company called Vision New Media, which is based in Malaysia. And the idea would be to film either a portion or possibly all of the series locally in Asia, in a variety of Asian countries. And I'd be thrilled. I think that would be great.
Oh man, that would be awesome. Like to hear that you guys are going to be doing, or hopefully going to be
Hopefully.
getting a kickoff to a TV series. Because I'm reading these books. I'm like, these would be perfect for a TV series on Netflix or what may have you, whatever
Wouldn't it be
streaming
great?
service. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the budget, you either go more, skullduggery and intrigue or high action. If you have enough money, you do something like Mission Impossible with lots of stunts. If you don't have that much money, you come up with other ways to make it a fun show. But yeah, so the comics came about. You mentioned that you're a newbie to Pulp Fiction, but an old hand at superheroes. Really, if you go back to the 1930s when the superhero comics first exploded, they were a kind of subset of Pulp Fiction. So Pulp Fiction was so called because the magazines that published these stories were printed on a kind of wood pulp paper that would degrade very quickly. It was the cheapest paper you could get, so you could sell these magazines for a dime. And there were pulp magazines specializing in mystery stories, pulp magazines with adventure stories like H. Rider Haggard or Indiana Jones type stuff. There were science fiction pulps like astounding stories, amazing stories. Those were all rocket ships and bug-eyed monsters, and robots. And there were the superhero comics. There weren't quite as many superhero pulps, but there were something similar like Doc Savage and the Shadow, which really were superhero characters, but told in prose. And so Pulp Fiction began around the same time that superheroes became big, but then there was a kind of fork in the road where hard-boiled detective stories started being written in words only, no pictures, and superheroes started being written only in picture form. And why that ever branched off, I don't know. But I loved both. I grew up reading. I was a Flash kid. I grew up with Barry Allen. I still have my collection of old Barry Allen issues, and of course, I love the Rogues Gallery with
You can't go wrong with Carmen Infantino and art either.
Carmen Infantino, right? I loved how every caption box had a little hand protruding from it and a finger pointing to whatever it was. I loved that. I met him once at a convention late in his life, and I remember saying to him, I loved how you drew the Flash, but I even more loved the little hands. Yeah, so this was how I grew up too, but I also fell in love with the hard-boiled detective stories of Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, like The Big Sleep and The Maltese Falcon. And about 21 years ago, a friend of mine and I got together and we said, we were born too late to write this kind of pulp fiction in the heyday. We weren't around in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Why doesn't anyone publish a line of books like that now? Skinny little books, not big 500-page doorstops with painted covers with gorgeous women and guys with fedoras and guns and really tight, high-velocity stories. And we probably shouldn't have tried, but we decided we were going to create a line of books like that ourselves. It wasn't comics. It was traditional novels, painted cover, but the rest was just words on paper.
Right.
And that took off, and we've been doing that for about 20 years. But the company we worked with originally to publish those books went out of business. Not our fault. Not even their fault. It happens.
It happens.
And we switched to working with Titan Books, based in the UK. And Titan, which is a wonderful company run by a couple named Nick Landau and Vivian Chung, very much family run and terrific business. They also publish comics. And in fact, they're famous for things like Doctor Who and Blade Runner and Conan. And at one point, Nick and Viv said to me, why don't we try hard case crime comics? And crime comics have generally not been the most successful genre. It's not as up there with superheroes, but there was, Dick Tracy, and there's Ed Brubaker's collaborations with Sean Phillips, and things like Mystery by Max Allan Collins, and of course, Road to Perdition by Max Allan Collins, History of Violence. So there are some examples. And we said, sure, we'll try it. And I promised Nick at some point I would write one myself. I don't know if it was a promise or a threat, but I said I would write one myself.
A threat of a promise, maybe?
It turned out to be, if it had sold terribly, if no one had liked it, it would have been a threat. But it turned out this was Gun Honey, and I just had a blast writing it, even though I didn't know if anyone else would want to read the thing. I'd written novels before, I'd written TV, I'd written magazine articles, but I'd never written a comic in my life. And when it came out, I was astonished that the first issue of Gun Honey was the top-selling. I want to call it the top-selling indie comic of the year. What Diamond called it was the top-selling non-premiere comic of the year, which is kind of a backhanded compliment. Right. But I knew what they meant. It's not Spider-Man, it's not Superman, but of the non-premiere titles, it was the top seller, and that was just, who could have guessed?
That is so awesome to hear, because I do remember, like, at least again from working at the comic shop, that we had a lot of people in, and my boss eventually like came in and said like, hey, did you guys know that Gun Honey was like our number one stuff for the year, and also like our like the tops on Diamond? I was like, really? That's interesting.
Yeah, sadly, it wasn't enough to keep Diamond from going bankrupt, but I'm still proud of it.
As you should be.
I give a lot of the credit, by the way, to Adam Hughes, who is we have many great artists and that we've been proud to work with. Bill Sienkiewicz and Art Germ, and I've mentioned just a few both before we got on and now. Robert McGinnis, the poster painter who did the original Sean Connery James Bond movie posters, painted several covers for us. Sadly, he died earlier this year at the age of 99. But Adam Hughes painted the very first cover A, and it was just a stunner. And I think people saw that cover in the stores and they said, I want to know what this is. I never heard of Gun Honey. I don't know Ardai's name. I don't know the artist's name, but wow, what a cover. And so I give Adam a lot of credit, and I'm thankful that he's come back for each Gun Honey series since then. He did covers for Gun Honey Blood for Blood, which was 2022, Gun Honey Collision Course, which you mentioned, which came out in 2023 and 4. And he's coming back. He just told me yesterday he's coming back to do a cover for Gun Honey Doubles Down, which will be our 2026 series. You can see, by the way, that that they follow an alphabetic progression. The original Gun Honey was just called Gun Honey, but the second was Blood for Blood. The third is Collision Course. Fourth is going to be Doubles Down. I had to think what would be a good D title for it.
Now you're gonna go with Extreme Exposition or something.
Right, Evil Empire. I don't know. I haven't even thought of it yet.
That's super cool to hear from Adam, because Adam is one of my favorite cover artists, favorite artists just in general, and it's really hard for me to pass up on any good Adam Hughes cover. Doesn't matter what series it is. And I can say, like, at least from working at the comic shop, one of my coworkers, he's a big Adam Hughes fan. He'll read anything Adam Hughes related. That's how he picked up Gun Honey, and I can say the same for all the other people at my shop. Like, we went through, I think, like 5 or 6 different reorders for the first issue of Gun Honey because of the Adam Hughes cover.
It was an amazing, and that's actually what I told Adam when I was first talking to him about Gun Honey. I said, I will read any book that has one of your covers on it. I'm not generally a Betty and Veronica reader, but I remember he did a Betty and Veronica series where I think, if I'm remembering right, he did the interiors also, and that was just irresistible. That's like when Alex Ross did the those giant oversized books, the interiors. Getting that much Adam Hughes in one comic, I don't care what it is, I will buy it in a heartbeat. And I was very grateful that he agreed to do it even once, and to come back 4 times is even better.
And hopefully 400 more times.
Or hopefully more 400. Yes, we can all live that long
in the future. You talked earlier about transitioning from prose to comics, because you were originally a prose, all words, little to no pictures, illustrations. Tell me about your transition from prose to comics and how difficult that was for you, and or just overall, like, how was the transition?
Well, I love doing it. I will say it's harder. I think writing a comic book script is harder than any other thing I've ever done. And in part, it's because it's so constrained. I think of it as very much like writing a sonnet or writing a haiku, where there are certain numbers of syllables you have to count or lines you have to count. So a comic has to be exactly 22 pages. If I write a novel, it can be 350 or 150. It doesn't matter how many pages. I can choose. And how much goes into each chapter is up to me. But in a comic, it's got to be exactly 22 pages. And each page can only have so many panels on it before it becomes unreadable. And each panel can only have so many words of dialogue. And then the other thing, of course, is you can't show motion. So I've written TV scripts, and there you are limited to a certain number of minutes, although for streaming now I think you have more flexibility.
Right.
But within those minutes, you can show pretty much whatever you want. If you've got the budget, you can show it. But on a comic book page, you can't even show she walks down the hall. What you're showing is a picture of her in the hall. So she opens the box. Either the box is open, or it's closed, or it's half open, but you can't actually see it opening. You can cheat a little with motion lines on the back of a motorcycle or something like that, but you basically have a series of still images. So it's like you're producing a kind of snapshot diary of the story, and yet you have to give the illusion of enormous amounts of action, right? Because that's what readers want. And so you're trying to do scenes like the great James Bond movies or the great Mission Impossible movies, those wonderful action scenes and stunts, and you're doing it with 3 or 4 panels sometimes of Dahlia Racers, the heroine of Heatseeker, skiing down the Italian Alps with 2 men on snowmobiles chasing her and shooting at her. That's a great panel. But how do you capture the adrenaline of the moment, the velocity of the moment? And it's possible, but it's tricky. And I'm forever worrying that my my exposition is going to fill too much of the panel and you won't see the characters' faces. So it's definitely a challenge, but it's a fun challenge. One of my favorite things is trying to figure out the pacing so that any revelation will come on an even numbered page. Because if a revelation comes on an odd numbered page, when you turn to the even numbered page, which is left hand,
Right.
you already get a glimpse of the right hand page. So that's no longer a surprise. You want any surprises to happen when you turn the page. It doesn't always work, but you try. And these are the fun challenges of writing comics. Always have the big explosion happen on an even numbered page.
I love that thought in mind because, again, as somebody who reads superhero comics all the time, I can't tell you how many times like I'm reading a comic and it's like you have to figure out how many pages that you're going to show, hey, we're going to have like this big superhero fight or, whatever is going on. And that'll go on for maybe the entirety of the issue for pages. But now it's like you have to figure out the balance of that between, the ongoing plot and threads of the story, all the soap opera stuff that usually comes with any side of drama, right? And I can figure it'd be the same for gun hunting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we always have twists and turns because this is that what people want from a crime story is generally surprises and twists, and so it can't all be action. And so you have to fit into the 22 pages, four issues. Our series always run 4 issues, so it's 4 times 22 pages, and into all that you have to fit some really big twist at the end. You have to have good cliffhangers at the end of each issue for the first 3 issues. We also It won't surprise anyone who knows Gun Honey and Heat Seeker to hear this. We also like sex appeal in our comics. And so we are always trying to think of interesting ways to get our characters into situations that are sexy. So, for instance, the next Gun Honey series, which comes out in 2026, takes place in Russia. It's a very James Bondian kind of international intrigue story and assassination plot. But Russia is cold. And how do we get the characters to not be wearing giant coats and fur hats the whole time? I assure you, I have found some clever ways. For one thing, I set the entire story in August, and most of it in the southern portion of Russia rather than northern Siberia. But anyway, these are some of the challenges, but they're fun challenges. And getting to see all the different artists interpret the characters and all their different views of what sexy looks like is great fun. I love seeing the cover artists come up with different body types for the same character, just because every artist has their own thing that they like a lot.
Right, for sure. And speaking of Russia, or I guess, we talked earlier about Malaysia and whatnot. You have so many different settings for your books, not only just with Gun Honey, but with every single crime series that you have written and curated for Titan. At what point do you decide, if I may, where we're gonna set this specific caper and when you're gonna do it?
To some extent, it's personal whim. It's like, what's an interesting place we haven't gone yet. I will say sometimes it's influenced by personal travel. My wife decided we needed to take a family trip to Venice, Italy at one point. I don't remember any longer what prompted that, but it was gorgeous. And I took a ton of photographs, which I could then hand over to my artist for Heat Seeker, Ace Continuado, who is brilliant and wonderful, and I think does action scenes like nobody else. And I just gave him a bunch of Venice photos from my trip. And here's us in a gondola, here's us near a mansion, and I said, now we just put the action in front of these buildings and we're set. So I had the good luck to have good photos of Venice for that reason. For the new Heat Seeker, so Heat Seeker Exposed is a little bit of a change of pace. Heat Seeker Combustion, which came before, was in Italy, Austria, Germany, the sky over England. And for Heatseeker Exposed, I decided I'm going to do something different, which is to go somewhere I don't think of as exotic at all because I was born here. I grew up here, which is New York City. But of course, plenty of people around the world consider New York City very exotic, very exciting. And so I thought, what would be if I weren't an old hand in New York, what would be the things that would be exciting here? And so I have Dahlia Racers, our heroine, is being pursued by an investigative reporter who wants to expose all her criminal secrets, and she has to get away. And of course, the first place she runs is into the subways. She's pursued into the subways. So now she climbs up on top of the subway car. We're always warned in New York City. There are recordings going all the time saying, don't surf the tops of the subways. Do not engage in subway surfing because people die that way. And so, of course, I thought, perfect. people die that way. That's great for my heroine. And so she's running along at the top of one moving subway train, and another one's coming in the other direction, and she jumps from one train to the other. I thought New York can be as exciting as the Italian Alps or any other place. So we visit Times Square, we visit a giant skyscraper construction site halfway through construction, and somebody might or might not, I'm not spoiling anything, fall off the side of the building. Lots of exciting, fun action to be had in New York City. Although before the end of the series, it doesn't take place 100% in New York City. By the last issue, we are in the Caribbean because why not?
Why not? This makes my mind race to the Subway Surfers game on mobile, yep. Where it's like you're running 2, 3 and wide, and the police are chasing you. I can think of Dolly.
I love that. Yes, yeah. It's like there's this cross-pollination. So I started out writing about video games originally. When I was 13, 14 years old, no magazine would publish the work of a 13-year-old kid except some magazines that reviewed video games. So I would go to these magazines and I'd say, if you let me review a video game for you, actually, there was no end to the sentence. Would you let me review a video game for you? And some of them said yes. And you saw originally that back in the Atari days, you had video games that were directly inspired by the movies of the time, like Star Wars. So all those first-person spaceship combat simulators were straight out of the Death Star trench scene or straight out of the TIE fighter fights. But now what you end up with is a new generation of movie makers who are in turn influenced by the first-person shooters that they grew up playing as kids. So there's this constant back and forth. And I think the same is true for comic book creators. We remember the video games we played, and we try to recapture some of that on the page. We remember the movies that we fell in love with, and we try to recapture some of that on the page too. It's entirely accidental that Gun Honey is a story about a black-haired heroine, and Heat Seeker is about a redheaded heroine. She's not actually a redhead; it's a fake. It's a wig because she's a master of disguise, but she goes around with red hair most of the time. And in the last Heat Seeker, I introduced a new character, Evie Parker, who's blonde. I didn't intentionally have a brunette, a redhead, and a blonde. But now I realized, as I was looking at it, I realized now I've got Charlie's Angels. I recreated Charlie's Angels. Right. I didn't do it on purpose, but that's what I did.
But that's like you said, the cross-pollination, and overall just the influence that sometimes we maybe don't see coming, but we know, like, because of our experiences, that it will eventually mold and shape us to do something that might be completely unintentional. I remember Ed Brubaker brought this up in his newsletter when someone said, "Hey, your Captain America run kind of feels like Grant Morrison's run. Were you writing those like at the same time? Like, did you know about it?" And Ed Brubaker said, "No, like I love Grant's run, but none of the work was." But that just happens, right? Because stuff happens where you are influenced by it, and you want to do whatever that thing you're influenced by.
Absolutely. Whatever you grew up reading, whatever you really loved, you want to give people the same experience, the same kind of experience that you had when you read it. So you go to a movie like The Usual Suspects. Granted, it's a very old one, so I don't have to worry about spoiling it, but I still won't spoil it. But you get to the end of that and you think, how can I give readers a twist like that? Something that they're going to say to their friends, "Oh my God, you've got to read this because what a wild twist." And then you try. Now, a twist as good as The Usual Suspects comes around once in a generation, or the Sixth Sense. But you try, and so yes, I think you take all your influences and you try to one up them, or you try to at least reproduce them, and have a lot of fun doing that. One of the interesting things in the last two comics that I did, Heat Seeker Combustion and the new one, which comes out on. Well, as we're taping this, it comes out in 2 days on Wednesday. Of course, by the time somebody listens to this, it may already be out. But I introduced this character, Evie Parker, who's a mercenary, a professional killer, but she also happens to be a geek. She happens to be a total nerd. And so she refers to everything. She views the world through the lens of someone who loves Star Wars, Star Trek, comic books, Monty Python, all these things. She just happens to be also a professional killer. And so working in those references is a very explicit meta way to be able to put my all the things that inspired me on the page, and that's been a lot of fun too. And I've seen a number of people in chat rooms and on forums saying, I hope we get a standalone book about this character because I love this character, and I do too. So we may end up doing that. We may have an Evie Parker series at some point.
I mean, if Heatseeker can get one, I mean, from the success that you guys have had, I don't see why not, right?
I need to come up with a title. So now we have the pattern Gun Honey and Heat Seeker. You've got that sort of one syllable, two syllable rhyme thing going. So I'm trying to think what the third one will be. I don't know. So I invite any of your fans who want to submit suggestions. The characters there in the comic, you can read about it, and what 2-word title might be a good fit for this character. I will gladly take suggestions.
We'll take all the I's and whatever 2-syllable words will come after because of the order of the alphabet.
That's right.
Exactly. If you may, but you talked about putting personality into your characters, like just making somebody offhand a geek, or maybe adding this layer to them, and I find that cool because you're typically with some of the not trying to name any names, but sometimes like you read something or you watch something and it's like they're just this caricature, or this character's like a caricature or a stereotype of another thing. But one thing I like about your books is that the characters that you write are usually multi-layered. And there's always like different facets to them that isn't just like, oh, like they only do this for a living and that's all they do.
Yeah, I think that's more interesting. And you do see that in classic comic book characters. Black Widow has a backstory. All the characters that you really love, the ones that stick with you, have a backstory. They don't all have as many quirks, although some of them do. I find it interesting, and also relationships among them. So, for instance, Gun Honey and Heatseeker, the two characters, were girlfriends. They were in a relationship. They no longer are, but they're exes. And so I thought that was interesting. That could be an interesting dynamic. Now Dahlia of Heatseeker is going out with Evie, and we're going to have Evie meet her ex-girlfriend, and what kind of stress and tension will come out of that. That'll be interesting. I don't know. I find that more interesting than characters who are kind of blank page. It also makes the writing process easier because the characters just start talking. They have something to say.
And it's also like a big canvas of stuff that you can just throw on there and say like, hey, I can paint something beautiful out of it, right? Even if you're not drawing the pictures yourselves.
Yeah, exactly. I only have words and relationships to work with. I'm phenomenally impressed with anyone who can take a blank page and draw a world on it. I can't do that, but what I can do is dream up relationships. I can dream up reasons that people do things and what happens next. I'm the what happens next guy, and then I send the script off to Ace on one hand or Ang on the other hand, and then I get the questions. What did you mean by that? What was that supposed to look like? I have a scene in issue 3. I won't explain why, but there's a scene in a morgue, a New York City hospital morgue. And I had a body bag with a body in it deposited on the morgue drawer. And I tried to describe what was going on in the scene. And Ace quite reasonably said, how is this, how are people supposed to get at this bag if it's inside a drawer, inside a morgue cabinet with the door closed? And I said, I didn't mean it was inside with the door closed. I meant the door was open and the drawer was pulled out. But that's the kind of conversation you have to have with an artist, no matter what, because there's no way to have enough words on the page to convey exactly what everything in a room looks like.
All right. So the communication that you have seems like it's pretty awesome.
We go back and forth by email 5 times a day and have a lot of fun doing it. It's and then of course then the inker and the colorist and all the different people contribute. And the funny thing is, I think of the pencils as bringing my words to life initially, but then I try to put myself in Ace's place and Ang's place. When the colors get added, that must be as transformative for them of their black and white work as the creation of images is for me from my words. So at each step, this collaborative medium just transforms what you're working on.
It is, and I sort of compare this to myself in, like sometimes I'll watch old NBA games because they run on NBA, like Hardwood Classics comes around on NBA TV every so often. Sometimes I'll 60s games featuring Bill Russell and the Celtics or Wilt and the Sixers, right? They come about, but I'm watching a game, say in the 70s or 80s, and like Magic and Bird come in and Irving comes in. It's like, oh wait, there's color here. Like there's something added that my eyes can bring. I don't know. That's what I always think of when the colorist comes aboard. When it's like, I love the pencils, I love the inks, but man, like, putting the final touches and making the world vibrant, saturated, it makes the world more fluid and full to me.
Absolutely. I mean, you can have a scene where color makes all the difference. We did a scene recently where there are gunshots. Somebody's firing a gun, somebody's getting hit, and the fact that he's in a white bathrobe, the one who's getting hit, with two explosions of blood coming out of the back of the bathrobe, that changes the scene. The black and white version of it was gorgeous. The color version adds something because those two spots of red make the world of difference. You understand this is a fatal moment because of those two spots of red. And without that color, it's a different scene.
Oh, for sure. I 100% agree with that. Let's talk about twists, because I think that, at least in terms of writing, obviously the best stories have the best twists, in my opinion, right? I always think of, I know it's cliche, I know it's over talked about, whatever you want to call it, but Empire Strikes Back, when when Vader tells Luke that he is a father. I was watching a reaction video a couple weeks ago, but because my brother is on a Star Wars watching marathon, my younger brother watching Star Wars, I'm like, man, I love these movies too. I'll just sit along with you. We were watching Empire, and we're still both shocked by the revelation. I watched a reaction video back in the 80s, like somebody recorded it illegally, I suppose. And they posted it, and everybody in the theater was like, there ain't no way.
Well, I was there. I'm old enough to have been there live. I saw
Goodness.
Star Wars in the theater in '77, and I saw Empire in '81. And I remember it was shocking. People were absolutely shocked because there were no online forums. There was no online. And so it hadn't been spoiled. In Star Trek II, Spock's death scene was spoiled. It got out that Leonard Nimoy wanted to end the character and that there would be a death scene in Star Trek II. And then they did a fake out where there was an initial death scene in the opening sequence. And then when they got to the end, it was a little bit of a surprise. But that got out. Luke's father, no, that did not get out. And it really was devastating. And there have been movies since, not high profile ones. It's usually some small indie movie that surprises you, that nobody cared enough about to bother leaking. And then the ending is a surprise. Usual Suspects would be a good example of that. And pretty quickly these days, the twist is hard to hide. If you're on any chat site, if you're on Discord, if you're on any server anywhere, somebody's going to just dump it in your lap. And so if you don't go to a movie on opening night, you're stuck. But there was a time when twists could really, really surprise you. And I've done that in novels, and happily some readers really liked that. And to the extent that I can, I've done it in comics. I of course don't want to spoil them, but the original Gun Honey had a twist I'm proud of, and Heat Secret Combustion in particular had a twist I was very happy with. We'll see how. So the Russian story that I'm writing now, I'm halfway through writing it. I know what the twist is, but I haven't written it yet, so it might still change. I like it, but we'll have to wait and see.
Interesting, because I always find, again, like, the best stories have the best twists, and obviously you write, and I'm like, what goes in your guys' mind when you think of, oh my goodness, this is going to knock the wind out of somebody's lungs?
It's very exciting when you come up with a twist and you realize that it hasn't been telegraphed, in part because you didn't know it was coming yourself. And you think about all the pieces that are on the chessboard, and you think, if I move these three pieces in this way, I can do this thing that no one will see coming. And that feels great. It feels like you want to laugh. You feel this laughter bubbling up inside you because you've got something to really devastate people with. It's a little like being a dungeon master when you're DMing a D&D game. And the party's about to walk into something that you've planned for them, and they don't know what's coming. And it just feels so good. It feels so good. So it's a lot like that. And in fact, you can think of writing, any kind of writing, as basically being a weird play-by-mail version of role-playing. Play-by-mail, nobody who's watching this will remember play-by-mail, but the idea was, if you didn't have friends nearby to play with, you would write a letter and you'd say, I do this, and then the DM would write you back, and it would take forever. Every turn was like a week. But the idea is, if you're writing a book, it's really something similar. You're describing a setting. The reader is forming opinions about what's likely to happen next. It's one directional. They can't give you advice, and they can't tell you what they're doing. But basically, each chapter, one chapter at a time, you're getting the opportunity to lead them through this story. So you create this image in their imagination. I guess the main difference is it's non-interactive. So my analogy is completely wrong. But still, as an author, I feel more like a dungeon master than I do like some, fine artist in a garret somewhere. I want to give the reader a certain particular exciting experience. I want to surprise them. That's
Yeah, that's awesome. Because my to I guess compare it to my life, like my friend who is he's been a bit like he's super big in D&D. We played a Pokemon dungeon master type of dice playing game where I was controlling a Pokemon and I had to kill as many people with the Pokemon as much as possible. But then he pulled off a twist where it was like, oh, like you find this Pokemon, like then he gets thrown in jail or this and that, and I'm like, well, that's no fun, but it was super well done.
But it was surprising.
Right. So
I remember my favorite D&D memory, which is not so much about a twist, though it was a challenge for me and my best friend at the time. We told all our players that he and I had worked out a module, an adventure, and we were going to split the party into two camps. And he went to one hallway in our high school, and I went to a different hallway in our high school, and we led these separate parties to through a portion of the adventure, and then we were going to swap. And what we didn't tell them was we hadn't prepared anything. That is, each of us had separately prepared, but we hadn't shared with the other what we were doing. And so for us, it was like an exercise in improv. We had to pretend we knew what once we switched, we had to pretend we knew what the party had been through, and through a variety of clever questions, try to elicit from the players what had actually happened in the adventure so far. It wasn't completely successful. We were 15 and we thought this was a cool thing to do, but it was fun. It was interesting. I don't know how long it took them to figure out that we were full of it and we hadn't coordinated at all, but it was fun. And you see that kind of thing in collaborative comics and collaborative novels, where one writer writes the first chapter, somebody else writes the second. There was one great series that I adored called DC Challenge. I wonder if anyone remembers that. It was a 12-issue series. Each issue had a separate writing and art team. And the game was that each issue had to introduce a new character and had to leave things at a horrible cliffhanger, and the next team had to solve it. And the goal was to set up a cliffhanger so impossible to get out of that, Batman was about to die. I seem to remember in one case, there was an out-of-control bus running towards a group of nuns and orphans. And
oh my goodness.
But it was great. It was great fun. Of course, by the end of the series, it had become completely unreadable because it didn't make any sense. But the individual issues were wonderful.
Because you had to piece out every single bit of information that the previous team didn't give to the next one, and see how the next team said, wait, I think this of this.
I know where I want to go with this. Right. So issue 1 set up a bunch of things that writer didn't have to solve. So he didn't care how it got solved. And issue 2 had to pick up from issue 1. That's fine. Issue 2 from 1 was fine. But by the time you got to issue 10, the writers for issue 10 had 9 issues of non-collaborative gunk to resolve. So it was a mess. But I would love to read that again. I know I loved it when it happened. That must have been in the 90s?
Yeah,
something like that.
We need DC to put out a deluxe
Challenge 2.
Challenge 2 or deluxe collection.
Oh, they should, right. They should definitely do a deluxe, the oversized volume. That would be a great idea. But they should do a Challenge 2, this generation's creators.
Oh my goodness.
It would be fun to do a crossover. This is never going to happen. It would be fun to do a crossover between some DC characters and the Gun Honey universe. They have no reason ever to say yes to that, and I've never even asked. But it'd be fun to see what Joanna Tan would do if she ran into Selena.
Oh man, that would be fun. That would be fun. Or any of honestly, Joanna and the Gotham City Sirens teaming up for a random issue. Oh my goodness, that would be fun.
I think the main problem is that Joanna and her buddies get too naked for DC. I think DC would be terrified by the idea that we would end up in a hot tub somewhere and show too much.
But maybe Gilliam March could draw it. They'll figure it out, make it Black Label or something like that.
There you go. It could be Black Label. Why not?
Look at that. See, this is the inventive mind thinking, Charles. I love it.
Exactly.
But I also I have to ask this too, because you mentioned not only Ed Brubaker, but you also mentioned Max Allan Collins, who I got a chance to finally read some of his Batman. I had read some of the issues post-Crisis, but I finally got a chance to read all of his Batman in the DC Finest trade paperbacks they've been putting out. Great. And I'm like, This is wonderful. Why has nobody ever told me that his short stint run on Batman was awesome? And I realized, like, hey, hold on, he's done books for you guys as well.
Yes. Yes,
And
he's
they're
actually
all,
done more books for us than any other writer. So Max is very prolific and very good. He's written prose novels for us, including something like 16 or 17 about an assassin, a professional killer named Quarry, which inspired a TV show, a short-lived TV show on Cinemax called Quarry. And he's written a series of private eye novels about a character named Nathan Heller, who solves some of the most interesting cases in history, like the Lindbergh baby kidnapping and Marilyn Monroe's death, and so on. On the comic side, he did a Quarry comic for us called Quarry's War. He did a Mike Hammer, Mickey Spillane comic called The Night I Died, I think. And we put out a 6-volume set of the collected Ms. Tree. So those weren't new for us. Those were the original Ms. Tree books that he did back in the 1990s. But they ran for about 10 years, and it took 6 volumes to complete the collected set. And they're really terrific. Terry Beatty did the art. And yeah, he's a wonderful writer. I'd like to see him do more superhero stuff myself. I think Batman was a natural fit for him. It's funny how many of the DC characters really are, in some ways, characters from a 1970s crime movie. Clark Kent is an investigative reporter, like all the President's Men. Barry Allen is a police scientist. Bruce Wayne is a millionaire, but nominally a detective. And we have a lot of sort of crime characters and crime fiction tropes. I was thinking it would be fun to do something with DC characters in the vein of crime fiction. I think Marvel did that. Marvel had a couple of novels with the sort of Daredevil, Jessica Jones characters.
Yeah. I can think of like a billion Bendis books, like off the top of my head, where it's like, oh, these are like absolutely awesome, like crime thrillers. Like him making Daredevil a crime thriller, one of my favorite runs of all time, just overall.
Daredevil is pure, really pure crime fiction. I mean, there is a costume and there are, powers and so on, but it's a crime story. Much more so than my favorite Flash. I just I was 7, I was 8. What are you gonna do? But it'd be fun. I've thought at some point that it would be fun to do something with that character, but again, who knows when and if. Maybe I'll introduce a character in the Gun Hunter universe named Barry Allen. We'll see.
But now that I'm thinking, maybe you could pitch a Barry Allen or Question or whoever it might be, Black Label 3-issue series over at DC, make it magazine size.
Oh, that's interesting.
I know I would be first in line to to read it.
It'd be fun, whether I do it or some other writer. It would be great. I will mention, by the way, for anyone who is willing to go outside their comfort zone and pick up a Max Allan Collins book that is not a comic book, in January, granted that's 6 months from now, but in January, the very famous novel, The Maltese Falcon, will go into the public domain in the United States, and it enables Max to write a sequel. And he's written a book called Return of the Maltese Falcon. This is probably the most famous detective movie with Humphrey Bogart, The Maltese Falcon. And he wrote a sequel that I really love, and we're putting it out with a cover painting. It's a prose novel, not a comic book. We're putting it out with a cover painting by a comic book cover artist named Irvin Rodriguez, who, by the way, I think is tremendous. He's a young guy.
Yeah.
He did a number of...
He did the covers for Black Adam.
Black Adam, absolutely. Very realistic, just hyper-realistic painting style, and just an awfully nice guy. And I'd love to see more covers from him. He did at least one Heat Seeker for us, and he did the Maltese Falcon novel for us. Maybe we'll get him to come back.
That is going to be awesome to see put out. I'm excited. I'm excited for that. Hey. You also mentioned, I know that we mentioned Ed Brubaker, I know we mentioned Max. How has it been to see all of these awesome crime novelists or creators praise your Gun Honey, Heat Seeker, all of that work? How has that been for you?
Incredibly kind of them to take the time to do that. Ed's an interesting case. So I didn't know Ed Brubaker, but he reached out to me many years ago when he was just doing Criminal. When he was first doing Criminal, and he said very nice things about the Hard Case Crime series of novels. This was before we had any comics. And we came up with the idea that we would help each other out, and he offered to run an ad for Hard Case Crime in the back of Criminal, and I offered to run an ad for Criminal in the back of our Hard Case Crime books. I don't know that we ever sold any extra copies of either, but it was just a nice thing to do. And when I was starting Gun Honey, I sent a copy to him, and I said, let me know what you think, and he was kind enough to let me quote it. We've probably quoted it to death at this point.
Yeah,
But he is one of the rare creators who has complete independence and autonomy and flexibility and writes brilliant, brilliant
oh
stuff,
yeah.
but whose name is also a brand. If you say to somebody, Ed Brubaker, they know exactly what it means. It means incredibly high quality crime fiction storytelling in the comic book format. And how many names, creators' names, are like that? I mean, the real cognoscenti know every writer, every artist, but everyone knows Alan Moore, right? And people know Ed Brubaker. So the fact that he was kind enough to let me quote him on our books, it just means an enormous amount, because nobody knows the name Charles Ardai the way they know the name Ed Brubaker. So that was kind of him. Max Allan Collins, of course, I've been working with probably now for 20 plus years, and we're old friends at this point. And the third crime writer, who's a novelist primarily, although he also does comics, Dwayne Swarzynski, who was also kind enough to let us quote him. It feels great to have the shoe on the other foot, when I'm interacting with them as a fellow writer rather than as publisher or editor or business person. I like those roles too. I enjoy editing other people's work, but it's nice to just be a peer sometimes.
That's a wonderfully heartwarming for Ed to do, because I mean, I completely agree with you in the case of, this is somebody who what you're getting, right, when you pick up an Ed Brubaker book. I also still have yet to read a graphic novel by Ed Brubaker and usually Sean Phillips that I have been like, oh, I don't like this, or I'm like, it's okay. I'm like, no.
I never have. No, I mean, you have favorites among them, of course, but yeah, they're great. They're great. And by the way, the other thing was, we dreamed of having Sean Phillips do a cover for us for a long, long time, and I didn't even know if he'd ever have the time, because he's very, very busy. And at one point, I saw him post something online, like how his, I think he said his roof had sprung a leak, and did anyone, want any commissions done in a hurry, because, roof leaks cost money. And I immediately wrote to him, I said, Sean, forget about commissions. Do those too if you want, but how about doing a Gun Honey cover? And we got one of my favorites. It's really a terrific cover.
Oh man, yeah, no, they're like, those two are just like legends, like living legends in the comics sphere. I mean, you want to talk about, again, I have never read any bad work, I think, from either. Like, every single page that Sean puts out, I'm like, this is absolutely gorgeous. And every single book that I read from Ed is like, yeah, it's a 10 out of 10. I don't have any other notes. Like, when's the next one coming out?
It reminds me of some creators about whom I felt similarly, like Darwin Cook.
Everything
Darwin Cook ever touched was great, and his Parker adaptations of the Donald Westlake heist novels were great. And sadly, he's no longer with us. There was an artist named Glenn Orbick, who was a comic book cover artist. He did a ton of DC comics, including a lot of terrific run on American Century. And we got him to do a bunch of covers for our novels. And I thought for sure we would work with him for decades, because he was a young guy. He was 52, and he died. He had a tumor, and he died. And so my philosophy is, if you find someone whose work is brilliant, someone you think is really talented, reach out to them. Reach out to them now, because you never know. You never know when you'll get the chance to work with them and when you might no longer have the chance to work with them. And so I'm always scouring comic book stores and online sources to try to find the next generation, or any generation. These artists who can paint in this hyper-realistic way, it's so rare and so wonderful when you see it. It's not the only style that's good, of course, but I love that fleshy, painterly, realistic style. And so anytime I find someone like that, I don't wait. I write to them immediately, and sometimes they say no, or sometimes they don't answer, but I try to work with as many of them as I can.
They're all awesome, and I'm gonna take this like next 1 minute ish out of the final recording. But I was reading through the Absolute Superman Red Sun hardcover, and in the back of the book, this just came out last week. In the back of the book, DC actually published the original 4-page email pitch sent by Mark Millar
that's great.
Yeah, to DC editorial and the higher ups. Like, it was Dennis O'Neil and Mike Carlin at the time, so getting to like see their notes and whatnot, I was like,
that sounds great. I didn't see that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it is. But here's the funny part, and this is what I mentioned, because you talk about, like, guys like Bill Sienkiewicz, like somebody else who I love. Mark was like, man, I'm really tired of these painted artists. Like, could we get somebody who doesn't? I'm like, what's wrong with painted artists? Like, I love them, man. Like,
Well, it's everyone's got their
yeah.
their preferences. I actually love all sorts, and there are other non hyper realistic artists that we've gone with. There's a woman in New Zealand named Jasmine Darnell who does very much sort of pen and ink, two-dimensional style drawings, and I love them. I think she's brilliant, and they're very sexy and beautiful. So it's not all the hyperrealistic stuff, but somehow those hyperrealistic paintings feel like the Pulp Fiction covers of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. So they feel right for hard case crime in a certain way. So that's generally what we go for.
Oh, for sure. That this means that we need a J.H. Williams III to get to do a cover for you guys at some point.
Now,
That would be awesome.
who are the people now who are coming up who do this? I mean, everyone you say hyper realistic, everyone says Alex Ross,
Right.
and he's tremendous. And if he wanted to work with us, I would in a heartbeat if we
Right.
could afford it. But who are the other people who paint like that? And there are some famous ones, but who are the ones I haven't heard of yet? Like Irvin Rodriguez was new to me just a year ago, and what a talent that guy is! Incredibly talented. So I try to find them wherever I can, and hope that they want to do some work with us. I did have one, and I won't say who it was, in part because I don't remember his name, but very good trajectory. Has painted a lot for DC, maybe also Marvel. And when I approached him, told him how much I loved his work, which was true, he looked at Gun Honey and he said, "Oh, I don't do that sort of thing where it's I forget what he said, like where the breasts are characters." I said, "Oh, it's not exactly how I think of it, but it's true that the characters do have breasts, and it's true that they often aren't entirely covered in our comics. So if that's not going to be fun for you, you shouldn't do it." So once in a while we get a no, but generally people like what we do.
I mean, hey, you got Adam Hughes like on covers, right? I mean, it's hard to pass that up. You talked earlier about the 500-page book stoppers, but I'm also like, it would be so cool to have Gun Honey and Oversized at some point.
Well, we're doing a box set. So the first 3 are going to be available. I forget what the date is, but pretty soon will come out in a box set. So it's not quite the same. So we take each 4-issue storyline and we put it in a perfect bound trade paperback. Then when we have 3 trade paperbacks, we're putting them in a box set. Could we bind them together? It may take more than 3 because each of our graphic novels are only about 100 pages. So if you wanted a really nice brick, you might want 5 or 6 in there. But I think when we get to 5 or 6, we might want to do that. I think that's actually a very good idea. I don't know how many people have the shelf space for that sort of thing. But then again, how do people have the shelf space for 30 different variant covers?
Right. I'm part of the, if you want to call it the omnibus collecting community. Like behind me, I have a whole bunch of the 1,000-page bricks.
That's great.
Behind, because like at least for me as a semi-broke college student who's still living under the parents' rooftops, I try to get as much
value for your dollar.
Yep. And
as many pages, but yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, I will pay $125 for some of these big ones. And I think
I don't disagree. I feel the same way. I'll mention that we published 3 separate prose novels, collaborations between Jason Starr, a New York author, and Ken Bruin, an Irish crime writer. We published 3 separate books they wrote over the course of 10 years, and we're now bringing them out in a combined omnibus volume called Supermax that's coming out for Christmas. So we have done that sort of thing on the prose side, and maybe we'll start doing it on the comic side as well. I'm all for it. If somebody wants it, I would love to give it to them.
Charles, I'm telling you right now, there are going to be people who want that.
Excellent.
Do you have any dream fan casts for Joanne or?
Oh my gosh.
Or anybody else?
That's an awfully good question. Joanna has a male sidekick who doesn't turn up in every adventure, but has turned up in most so far. And he looks a lot to me like Channing Tatum. But for the women, it's a little harder for me to say. Somehow they live in my imagination in a way that precludes making them locking them down to one actress. I admit somebody pointed out that Sydney Sweeney would make a great heat seeker. I don't think that's false. I know why they said that, but But she hasn't got the red hair, but of course it's a wig, so she can put it on. I think there probably are some wonderful fan castings out there, and I don't even necessarily know who the actresses are because it's probably a younger generation of actresses. I'd probably name people that I grew up watching. You know, Bridget Nielsen would be a great Evie Parker back in the 1980s when Bridget Nielsen was playing Red Sonja.
Right.
But for the men, yeah, I think Judi Dench would be great as the head of the agency that tries to recruit Joanna, and Channing Tatum as the male partner. But the women, wow, that's a hell of a good question. I'd love to hear what people suggest, and who knows, maybe we can even get one of them to do it.
This definitely means that Sydney Sweeney is going to be in the Heat Seeker TV show. I'm joking.
Well, you know. It's funny. I'm thinking if you're Sydney Sweeney, how do you look at properties? You know, what are you looking at and looking for? Somehow, right? Margot Robbie. I don't even know how she pronounced it. I assume it's Robbie, but I don't actually know. You know, how did she get hooked up with her comic book adaptation?
Right? Harley Quinn, yeah.
So somebody must at some point have said to her, "Look at this character." I mean, maybe she's a comic book reader from childhood. I don't know, but more likely somebody handed her a comic book and said, "Can you imagine yourself in those short shorts and with the baseball bat?"
Right.
And so I assume these Hollywood stars need a vehicle. They need something to perform in, and just like Jason Momoa apparently said to James Gunn, "Lobo, I was born to play Lobo," and you know what? He was.
Yeah, he was.
Right. So there's probably some actress out there who was born to play Joanna Tan. I just don't know who it is.
Yeah, I find it funny you mentioned that because Sydney was also Sweeney was in the Madame Web movie.
Oh, Madame Web.
Yeah.
That's right. You're right. So she has gotten her first dose of granted, it wasn't the biggest success in the world, but her first dose of comic book film stardom. So who knows? It could be. Now, I will admit that there's probably, you know, somebody whose name is completely unknown who would knock it out of the park. And one of the interesting things about possibly filming in Asia is that we can have an Asian cast that will be maybe known to film goers in Malaysia and might not be known in the US, and be a chance to give someone exposure in a market that they might not otherwise easily crack. That would be fun. I'd really enjoy that.
Oh yeah, and I think the opportunity for those people especially make a bigger name for themselves or something like that. I mean, that's what you want, right? Like
yeah, exactly. Because you can have, you know, there are crossover stars all over. You know, most of them, Michelle Yeoh is one who's female, but you know, Chow Yun-fat and Jackie Chan, who were huge in Asia and unknown in the US until they had their crossover opportunity.
Right.
And I'd love to do that for an actress who would embody gun hunting.
Yeah, because you know, I'm Filipino, and I was also born in the Philippines, and naturally we have like Filipino dramas running on at like 8 to 10. Like when I was a kid, all that was running after like 6 p.m. if it wasn't basketball, till Filipino dramas.
It was going to be Filipino dramas. Well, you know, Ace Continuado, who draws Heat Seeker, is Filipino, and I would be delighted to send the characters to the Philippines. I have not visited myself yet, so maybe I have to go and take photographs, and then I can bring Heat Seeker to the Philippines.
That would be so awesome.
It would be cool.
But Charles, I would like to thank you for taking an hour out of your life with me to talk about everything Gun Honey and Heat Seeker. And guys, if you haven't yet, this week or on June the 4th, the brand new Exposed brand new miniseries is going to be published by Hard Case Crime under Titan Comics Publishing. You can go to your local comic store, wherever you get your comics via retailer, and order that. I got the Artgerm variant because I get every single Artgerm cover under the sun, no matter who publishes it. But I would like to thank you, Charles, once again for your time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. I will come back anytime. Yes. It was really nice to talk to you.
And have a good one, guys. Like and subscribe if you haven't. And stay safe. Have a great day wherever you are.